This is Roger and Dobe, folks, and this is our real voices. We haven't been cloned or deep faked yet.
Not yet. We're not as AI as all that, are we? No. We're not artificially intelligent, Dobe. So we're just.
Oh, we're certainly not that.
We thought we'd start this podcast just to say why we're doing this, because we've got a lot of stories, and it strikes me that a lot of people are interested, young people, but also older people who are interested in Australian history and also in the Bushwackers, because we've been going, as you know, we've been going for 50-something years. And, you know, it's an interesting story in Australian social music, culture, and all those things. So
and we can remember some of it.
Yes, and we thought we'd start doing this podcast so while we still have our brain cells, we can put this down on tape. The whole idea is we're going to take one song of the Bushwackers and use it to explain a few things about our history and culture and all that sort of stuff. So we've just listened to the Red Hot Woodstove, Dobe, by the very early Bushwackers. Now, who was in the Bushwackers and what year was that?
So this is 1974.
Wow.
And the makeup of the band was Mick Slocum, who was on accordion and concertina, Jan Wozicki, who played the bones and the spoons and the bowron and recited.
And it was also called Bill Smith, wasn't it?
And yes, that was his stage name because Wozicki got misspelt so many times. He just decided to adopt a persona. On acoustic guitar and a bit of banjo, we had Dave Isom. And on the fiddle, we had Tony Hunt. And on the lagerphone and the whistle, we had me.
Right.
Yeah.
Back in 1974.
Back in just after I joined, and the reason that we were putting those things together for our first album was because we wanted to take off to England. Right. And the reason we wanted to do that was because there was this amazing folk revival happening not only in England, but across Europe as well.
And here too, actually, yeah.
And here, but it wasn't so pronounced then. But what was happening in Europe was that a new generation of musicians were reimagining the folk culture and in many instances using modern instrumentation like electric instruments, drums and bass and electric guitars to augment the tradition aspects. So there were still fiddles and there were still accordions and bouzouki and other stringed instruments, mandolins. But we got inspired to do that medley of tunes because up until that time, folk bands had usually played one tune at a time.
Yeah, or like I play in Irish sessions, as you know, and we just do a bunch of jigs, and they're all in the same time signature. They might change keys, but they all stay the same.
Yeah. So the band was based in Melbourne at the time, and in those days, records, and there were only records, or the odd cassette. But in those days, if records weren't popular and they weren't supported by an Australian record label, then they weren't in the record stores.
Right.
So if you wanted to listen to music by overseas artists who weren't pop or rock artists, you basically had to go to specialty record stores. And in Melbourne, in Carlton, there was one called Readings.
Oh, that's right. Yes, I remember Readings.
And Readings, of course, as a bookstore,
yeah,
is still around. But in those days, it started as a record importer. So they'd have a few of the popular titles, but they understood that there was people who were interested in folk and world music and other minor genres, country being one of them at the time too.
Yeah, sure.
And what they would do is they would gamble on importing a few of each title and hopefully selling them.
Right, yeah.
So we began hanging out at readings, and we developed a terrific relationship with them. So they'd let us know when they had a new title by somebody. And the way that you used to be able to keep up with what was happening was there were a couple of print media music newspapers, which came from London basically, and they were the New Music Express and Melody Maker.
Oh, right.
And Melody Maker was the sort of go-to paper. And for those old enough to remember the street press in Melbourne and Sydney and other capital cities, they were much like that. They would cover topical stories, reviews of live shows, they had charts, they had record reviews, and so we would catch up with email copies of that and would see who was releasing what and go along to readings and see if they had copies. And that was where we discovered Fairport Convention.
Right, okay.
Who became our inspiration in a lot of ways, because they were probably the first band to do what that Red Hot Woodstove medley does, which is to take tunes in different time signatures, different tempos, and try and put them together in some sort of symphonic music piece.
Well, that's right, yeah.
With transitions into different time signatures and keys and all of those things.
Yeah.
And they were the first band we heard who ever did that. Up until then, as you say, it was basically bands taking a set of tunes and just
playing them,
segueing one into the other. But we heard that, and it was a revelation.
Yeah, I can remember seeing Fairport Convention back in those days, and somebody said, "Oh, you should go and see this band," and I saw Fairport, and that was the end for me. I just loved it from that point. I still do.
When we saw what was going on over there, and as I said, we were inspired by that, and then we thought about it for a while and thought, well, we're not going to have the opportunity to do this often, and we don't want to leave it too late. Let's go to England and be part of that revival and throw ourselves into it and see what's happening, because we were already doing tunes in that way. But then again, we've got something quite unique going on, because a lot of the Australian folk songs that we were doing at the time were much more energetic.
Oh, yeah.
So,
sure.
You know, there are a lot of bands who were part of that revival in Europe who were much less raw and energetic, because they'd come from that very long tradition of
finger in the ear folk music stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, they were doing new and interesting things, but as live entertainers, that wasn't their priority at all.
Because a lot of the songs were like, even Fairport and Steel Eye, they were like murder ballads and all sorts of things, and slow, ponderous things.
Yes,
songs.
yes.
The actual songs, the tunes, no, but the songs were a bit sort of ponderous, weren't
they? Absolutely. And with about 38 verses or something. And I mean, and many of them went back hundreds of years, where those stories, that was the way that you communicated them, by telling the whole story. So it was much more of an oral folk tradition than we had in Australia, where most of the songs that we played came from the droving trails and
shearing sheds
and mining. So they were basically working songs, and they were about hard physical activity in a punishing climate often, and they reflected those sorts of things. So we thought, look, it's going to be very interesting, because, as you said, most of the traditional songs we were doing the music was adapted from Irish or Scots, to a lesser extent English folk songs. So here you had a song about a shearing shed with hard physical labour, punishing conditions, often with the boss as the villain of the piece. But it was being done to a tune from England, Scotland or Ireland. So we thought to ourselves, I wonder what people will think if we take our music over there. Are they going to think, this is a pale imitation of our folk tradition? Or will they think, isn't this amazing? Here's another folk tradition which has adapted our stuff in the same way as it happened in the United States.
For sure, yeah.
With the Germans and Irish and the English to a lesser extent and the Scots.
Yeah.
Their tunes going over there and being adapted for things like bluegrass.
Yeah, well, that's right. And early country too.
Yeah.
Johnny Cash and all those sort of guys.
Yeah.
Definitely adapted folk music stuff. Yeah.
And we were very lucky because we had Mick, who was the accordion player, Mick Slocum, had a terrific background in having been involved in sessions. So he knew lots and lots of tunes. And then from all those records that we gobbled up, we learnt a whole new bunch of tunes and sat around working out how we might put them together in a very new and intricate way, which really worked. And of course, we still do it 54 years later.
Yeah, that's right. We're still putting sets of tunes together, like crazy people. It's a wonderful thing, though, like to see Fairport at their height, and also you blokes, because I used to go along, before I joined the band in 1980, I would go along to the Polaris and the Dan O'Connell and places like that, and we'd see those things, and the crowd would sort of, just bounce up and down, and it was like a punk gig or something back in those days, wasn't it? It was very exciting.
Oh, it was, and I mean, we were really forced to do that because the folk music movement in Australia was very tightly controlled by folk clubs, which sometimes had an organisation behind them, like in Sydney it was the Bush Music Club, and it was often a pretty closed shop. So they were the gatekeepers, and if they liked what you did, then you got a Guernsey, you were invited to come and play. They were controlled by expats from England and Scotland who had a very poor regard for the Irish tradition.
Really?
Yep.
That surprises me.
I know. Well, because the Irish had their own folk club type movement going with Coltus and...
Yeah, and there's lots of rebel songs. I remember there's a band around at the time... Oh, the Wild Colonial Boys, was it? Or there was definitely some Irish stuff. Tony Lavin and people like that.
Yes, the Colonials and the Wild Colonial Boys.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So I
one
remember
in
that
Sydney,
stuff
one
going.
in Melbourne.
Yeah, I remember those guys.
Yeah. So the Dan O'Connell used to be the place where the Melbourne Folk Club happened. And if you went to the folk club, you would invariably see a bunch of traditional singers, mainly, as you said earlier on, with the hand up, singing in harmony and singing very long, intricate, English mainly, folk songs. Now, they were fantastic performers, but it was pretty damn dull, and it was preaching to the converted.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
Well, you had to be a pretty hardy soul to sit there with your cider and listen to 3 hours of that.
Well, and people keep telling you to shut up.
Yeah, that's it.
And go, shh. Anyway, so we didn't get invited ever to be part of that folk club thing. But we knew that what we were doing was gaining in popularity, so we just decided to have our own nights. And that's why we established firstly at the Polaris and then later at the Dan O'Connell.
Yeah.
They were never sold as folk music nights. They were just a celebration of Australian music.
Yeah. It certainly was a celebration. I remember being in there, and we'd go up there, and it was like $5 or something to get in.
Oh, I don't think it was even
Not
that
even
much.
that
was
much.
it?
$2.50.
No.
And you'd buy a jug of beer and then bash it on the table, and people would, get up and dance. And that was kind of unheard for folk music, really, to be that sort of actually like a really big night out. You know what I mean? It was,
absolutely.
It was wasn't a thinky thing at all. It was just kind of, there was those things though. When I used to go and hear Jan tell those stories and that sort of stuff, it really, I don't know, it awoke something in all of us, I think, me as well, obviously, but, hearing about the swaggies and and the bushrangers and those stories were so much a part of that sort of stuff, and that's sort of where I guess that Australian context, came from in some ways.
And I mean, it's important to remember that people our age, when we went to school, we learned no Australian history.
Yeah,
right?
Still don't, I don't think.
No.
Yeah.
I could recite the kings and queens of England without any trouble at all.
Yeah.
But the only time I ever encountered Henry Lawson and to a lesser extent Banjo Patterson was because we had an English teacher who, when we had a down period for some reason, he would whack those out and he would read. But that was my only interaction with those things. And even later on at university, Australian history was hardly on the agenda.
Well, I did Australian history at school in 1970, and it was pretty dry. It was mostly politics from the 1940s or whatever.
Yeah.
It was pretty dry. But the Bushwackers really made it, for me anyway, come alive and get inspired. And I've heard said many times that people learnt more about Australian history from folk songs than they have from books, so
yes,
it's interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because, as I said before, if you think about the purpose of folk song, that was its original purpose,
right?
Which was to inform the community about the news stories of the day and what was happening in their community. Yeah. So, yes, so off we went to England and, with...
stars in the eyes.
That's the word I was looking for, Rog. Yes, stars in our eyes. Yeah. And it took a while. By the time the first tour was over and we were back in Australia after 9 months, Melody Maker had written something like, at first we didn't take them seriously, but by the time they left, they'd made a considerable dent in the English folk scene.
Yeah,
which we were thrilled about.
No, it was interesting. I was over there in 1975. I went to England with a rock and roll band.
There you go.
Didn't go very good, but I was privileged, I suppose, to see the Bushwackers at the Red Lion. Was that what it was?
The Golden Lion.
Golden Lion.
There was a Red Lion, and
right.
There was also a Red Cow.
A Red Cow. I think I went to the Red Cow. Maybe.
Cow,
yeah.
Yes.
Definitely went to a few Red gigs.
And
it was fantastic, and I think the Poms really loved it and responded to it.
Well, it's perfect. It's perfect pub music.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. I mean, it's perfect pub music because people go out for a good time.
Yeah.
Right, and they want to be enthusiastic, they want to yell and holler and have a good time.
Yep.
And that fitted in perfectly with the music that we were presenting. Yeah. There was none of that get on stage and go, all right, now everybody, you're not allowed to say anything or make any loud noises. You have to listen intently to what we're going to do. And
do you think it's because you had people back then, even in the band, who had just had that sort of rock and roll mentality, that wanted to be entertainers rather than just be performers, but be singers?
Oh, absolutely.
Because you're an entertainer, and I'm sure Mick was certainly an entertainer.
Yeah.
And Jan too, all entertainers rather than just.
Yes, and
I'm going to perform now. Or sit there and listen.
And I think. I'm not sure, but I think everybody had grown up with popular music. I don't think, and I might be wrong, maybe Dave Isom was the one who'd come through the folk tradition mainly.
Right.
But all the rest of us had grown up listening to the hit parades and
Beatles
you know,
and whatever.
and whatever was popular at the time. We'd absorbed all of that into what we were doing. And as I said, we understood that if we were actually going to make a niche for ourselves in the marketplace, then we had to be different from whoever else was vaguely in the same niche, that is the other folk bands. And there were other folk bands at the time. So in the early days of the Bushwackers, there was Mulga Bill's Bicycle Band, and there were a couple, and before
and
that,
the Cobbers, Dobe.
well, they were a little bit later, not much, but just a little bit
I
later.
used to go and see the Cobbers, and there some very good Irish bands too. Pocheen was around
Yes,
at
yes.
those days, and you know, it was such a lively scene back in Melbourne, wasn't it?
Yeah,
and
and when we
great
used to
bands.
come to Sydney, we used to go and see the Wild Colonial Boys. They were Wild Colonial Boys. There are some incredible stories. They were the Gallagher brothers of their day. Oh yeah, they
Were they the really Irish ones? That's that the Irish rebels?
no, that's the Colonials.
The Colonials, right?
Yeah. So they were the ones who were probably responsible for our early repertoire.
Oh, right.
In terms of the Rybuck Shearer and
Oh, right, yeah.
Lazy Harrys and all those songs. So that was their shtick. But, you know, they would have fights on stage and, it
Sorry,
was...
I missed those days.
Oh, absolutely. So they were also frowned on
Right.
by the folk establishment as well.
Yes, we'll have a bit to say about the folk establishment.
Oh,
at some
yes,
point.
yes. Well, and I mean, look, in a way, if we'd have been accepted into the fold, we might have smoothed off the edges and not been as musically adventurous
Yeah,
as we decided to be,
yeah.
especially after that, you know, coming back to Australia and having absorbed all of that revolution in folk music in Europe and deciding we needed to have electric instruments.
Yeah. I
So,
know.
you know,
There was an album out back in those days called The Electric Muse, which I think you can still stream on Spotify or something.
Yeah.
And it just traces the sort of the history of folk music and electric guitar and bass and drums. And there were some great bands. Albion Folk Band were around, and Steel Ice Band, and Fairport, and Silly Wizard, and there was heaps of really great, quite experimental stuff. Horselips even.
Yes.
And there was lots of that stuff around. And the Poms and the I guess in Europe they embraced it because they would all tour in Germany and France and all around around there, and they really embraced all that electronic.
They sure did.
And in Australia it was still no. You know, it was still a bit frowned on, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And if anybody can still find a copy of the Electric Muse album
Oh yeah.
online, it comes with a book.
Yes, oh, that's
And
right.
the book's fantastic.
Yeah, that's
It's
right.
really, really gives you a whole idea of how that evolved, because Steel Ice Band, original members of Steel Ice Band, Ashley Hutchings and Martin Carthy,
Yeah, that's
were
right, yeah.
really straight out of the tradition.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, you know, it was really interesting amalgam of people who'd come from a very strict folk upbringing, but deciding that they wanted to do more
Yeah.
and being prepared to break with conventions.
Yeah.
It didn't always work. I mean, there are a lot of bands that tried a different approach and it didn't necessarily work for them. But it was such an exciting time
Yeah.
to see that happening and to see people constantly taking it to the next level and trying things.
Well, you had Jethro Tull in there too. It was sort of like a heavy rock band, but they definitely incorporated that folky stuff.
Oh,
as well.
absolutely.
And
Yeah.
Led Zeppelin too.
I
but,
was
you know,
going to say, I mean, Led Zeppelin were great mates of the members of Fairport
right.
because they all lived in the same area and
Had the same
Drank.
dealers.
drank at the same pub.
Yep.
But yeah, so Robert Plant, if you listen to, you know, something like Stairway to Heaven, I mean, it's an experimental folk song, for God's sake.
Sure, that's right, yeah. Anyway, I think that commitment to being entertaining is something that's helped the Bushwackers sustain our career for this long. And I think, even like yesterday we did a gig and, I could just see like we change things around. So we don't just stick on one really nice slow song for the whole rest of the afternoon. We try and really mix it up with different sets of tunes and songs and funny things and sad things and political things and story songs as well. So I think we've kept that tradition, which has probably kept us in business all these years. So
absolutely, and I think people forget that, especially during the 80s, when we're fond of talking about pub rock, they were really the only venues available.
Yeah, that's right.
And if the Bushwackers were going to play in that environment, then we had to deliver the entertainment to that audience, or we would be dead. So if we couldn't be brash and loud and get people dancing, and from a publican's point of view, get them drinking, then we weren't going to get a gig.
Yes.
So we've always nailed our colours to the entertainment mast.
That's right.
And never been embarrassed about it.
No. And it all stemmed from those really early days when just made us stand to be out there and entertaining and do something a bit different and a bit dynamic and all those sort of things. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Stringy Bark Podcast with Dobe Newton and Roger Corbett from the Bushwackers. We'll see you next week for another episode.
See you, folks.